I want to welcome you to Introduction to the New Testament. I'll be your instructor for this class. This video lecture is going to be a little bit different in content and quality from some of the others that we're going to have because my webcam and microphone decided to fry themselves while I was trying to make it. So I apologize for that, and I'm going to do the best that I can do with the resources that I have still remaining to me that are operational. So I want to talk with you a little bit about Judaism in the first century because that's the immediate context of the New Testament. Jewish life and practice in the first century was pretty broadly diverse. There are lots of different ways to be a Jew, and there are different groups that are disagreeing over what it means to serve God and to have a relationship with God as a part of the Jewish religion and a part of the practice of their faith. There are a few things that unite almost all of the Jews of the first century, and the first of those is radical monotheism. So that is a commitment to the idea that there is only one God, which really separated them from almost everyone else in the world at that time. The Greeks and the Romans and other cultures that they encountered each believed in many gods, and they all served a different function. So some people might have believed that there was a god for storms and a god for child rearing, a goddess of love, different kinds of gods and deities that make the universe together. And in almost all of those religious traditions, the current gods may not have been the original ones. For example, in the Greek mythology, which is almost a mirror image of Roman mythology as well, the current system of gods really took over from the last gods, the Titans, and now they're in charge. So they're not necessarily the creator of all things. The Jews, they believed in something very, very different. They believe that they are in a special relationship with the God who is the creator of all things. They call him Yahweh. You see that in the Old Testament with Lord in all caps. That's his covenant name with Israel. It was originally mistranslated as Jehovah. Some people still kind of use that, but there's no J sound in Hebrew, so that's probably not right. It was substituted for the Y sound, which doesn't exist in German, who came up when the German scholars actually first translated it that way. So as far as we know, the name is probably pronounced Yahweh. They believe that this is the only being that should actually be thought of in the proper sense as God. He is not a created being, but is a being from which all other reality arises, one that has eternally existed and has made everything and has revealed himself to human beings so that people can know him because he wants to know and be known by human beings. Yahweh in Jewish thought is specifically has gone about this through his relationship with Israel, with the Jewish people, that he has chosen them to be his covenant people and has entered into a special and binding relationship with them, in which Yahweh himself has bound himself to them and they to Yahweh, and they owe him some obedience, and he has revealed to them through prophets and through their scriptures what it is that human life is meant to be about. Almost all Jewish folks would have agreed that Yahweh has revealed himself to, and that's recorded in their scriptures or their sacred writings. The five most important to all Jews at that time were the five books of Moses, or what we might call the Torah or the Pentateuch: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. These might also be called the books of the law. And while there are certainly a lot of narrative materials in there that explain how the Jews became the people of God, about the foundations of their covenant relationship and how they came to possess their land, things of that nature, we also find the specific moral and ethical commandments of Yahweh for his people. We find things like the 10 Commandments, which are the 10 most important facets of walking with God, such as don't murder people, don't steal things, don't commit adultery, honor the Sabbath, those kinds of things. There's also about 630 additional commandments in the Old Testament that they tried to follow. So that's something that's pretty characteristic of them, is they want to keep the law of God, and that those five books are particularly important to all Jews because they're the primary foundation of understanding what God wants out of the people he's in covenant with. Their understanding of God is also that he is an ethical being. For most people, when they thought of the gods, they thought of them as capricious beings, as uncaring beings, as beings that at best are honored and perhaps even manipulated and got on our side. Because through rituals and through sacrifices, so they kind of owe you one and they can help you out every now and again. That's very different in Jewish life, where they view God as an ethical being. So their religion is an ethical religion. It's based on doing the right thing, so to your neighbor and to other people, and that's a really important part of being a worshiper of Yahweh. And that was attractive to a lot of people outside of Judaism because it was something kind of different than what a lot of other faiths offered, which maybe had a vague, sort of be a good person because if you're too bad, the gods will get you. But to actually have a systematized approach to this is what it means to live a righteous life was really attractive. And that was something that sets the Jews apart from other folks. They also have an importance attached to the temple. The temple is, and there's only one in Judaism, is in Jerusalem, and that's understood as a place where God is particularly present and his presence is felt and available in ways it's not in other places. It's the only place in their faith that they offered sacrifices, and they did do that. They would offer animal sacrifices as an atonement for their sins. They would offer other offerings like peace offerings and goodwill offerings, offerings for when a child was born, and things of that nature, as a part of their connection to God and as a part of atonement, which is the forgiving of sins. And all of that's a part of first century Judaism. It's also important for us to understand that these are a conquered people, that just a generation before, they had been a free nation, and there was a civil war in that nation between two holdouts from the Hasmonean dynasty who both had a claim to the Jewish throne. And one of them made the mistake of appealing to Rome, saying, "Hey, General Pompey, why can't you and your Roman army help me out a little bit?" without realizing that Rome would come in and permanently set up shop and make them forcibly, a Roman province and a Roman territory under their control and liable to Roman taxation and governance. So this is a country that's been militarily occupied, and that wound is still fresh enough to sting. They're really struggling with how to define how do we be ourselves under Roman rule with all of these foreigners here telling us what we can and can't do, and their soldiers marching up and down our streets. So that's another really important facet of Judaism in the first century. There are different groups, and this is where it really begins to diverge, who disagree with what it means to be a Jew, what it means to be a person of God and a member of the covenant community. And they have different approaches to that. One of the most important groups that we'll encounter early and we'll run into often are the Pharisees. And the term Pharisee literally means separated one. And that's going to give you a little bit of a clue to their approach to religious life and practice. The Pharisees themselves were committed to the idea that everyone should keep the very special and stringent holiness rules in Leviticus that were originally developed for the priests while they were on divine service in the temple. They were supposed to be particularly holy people because they represent a connecting point between God and humanity. And the Pharisees thought everyone should try to keep these very specific, very strict religious rules. They also have a strong emphasis on keeping the commands of God. And there's this kind of a religion of thou shalt not. We keep the commands by not breaking them. So they recognize the Torah, and in the diagram that you're about to see, it'll kind of explain to you functionally how this works. The Torah, the actual commandments of God in the Old Testament, that's what's the most important thing. But in order to keep you from unintentionally breaking those, the Pharisees constructed like a fence around the Torah that they would call the rabbinic law or the oral law, the rabbinic tradition. And it's basically their system of commentary that's treated as authoritative on how you keep the law.